But ultimately, the main one being He is risen. He is risen indeed. The sacrifice of Friday, am I on? Are we good? Jacob, am I on? Okay. I can't tell. My ears are still half plugged. But the sacrifice of Friday, of Good Friday, makes so much more sense and comes to fruition in today. So we get to absolutely celebrate and shout and worship because today is Easter. The grave is empty. The stone is rolled away. The grave cloths are lying there with no body inside of them. That's why we celebrate. Because He is risen. He is not there. Today, I told you guys we're not going to necessarily have an Easter sermon. I want to keep going through Romans. We've spent the last 3 weeks looking at Romans 9, Romans 10, and now Romans 11. And it's so beautiful. I call it a cosmic coincidence, a divine coincidence, because I don't believe in coincidence. But frankly, God blessed our time and made it line up perfectly where we get to talk about salvation in Romans in a little different light than we normally think of, but at the same time of Easter. So we get to spend this time, we get to talk about. 2 weeks ago, we looked at how God is sovereign in His election, in His mercy, in His deciding. Then we looked at last week how that gift of salvation is available to all. That Jesus is a Savior for all. And the implications, right, of going out. And how can anybody believe if they have not heard? And how can they hear if no one tells them? And how can anybody tell them if no one's sent? And we talked about how all of us are sent to go and preach the good news of the gospel. Today we're continuing. We're still in Romans. Romans chapter 11. I entitled this sermon, The Gift Above All Others. Still going with the idea of Easter, this gift of salvation, the gift of celebration that we get to enjoy on Easter Sunday. But also looking just plainly where we are, where we've been studying, keeping the context freshly in our mind. Again, we're not going to read through the entire chapter just for the sake of time. We're not going to read through the entire chapter of Romans 11. But bear with me as we dive in, and as we study, and as we get to see this gift above all other gifts that we could ever dream of, that could ever be named. We get to experience this special gift for all. So in Romans 11, verses 1 through 10, we begin to see a picture given by Paul of Israel rejecting Christ. In verses 1 through 10, Paul paints this picture, gives an explanation of how the people of Israel as a whole have rejected Christ. He says at the very beginning, I ask then, based off of what he said in the end of Romans 10, I ask then, has God rejected His own people, the nation of Israel? Of course not. But they have. Israel's rejected Christ, but God has not rejected Israel. As a whole, I put whole in quotations to bring this idea of the singular entirety of Israel has rejected Christ. We know that. They claim He's not the Messiah. He's not who He claimed to be. No matter that the grave was empty on Sunday morning, He's not the Messiah. Right? Israel as a whole has rejected Christ. God has not rejected them. A remnant remains. A remnant remains. And this is where we begin to see in Paul's wording, verse 2. No, God has not rejected His own people, whom He chose from the very beginning. He gives us the example of Elijah, the prophets. God has not rejected them. But we see back in verse 1, Paul gives himself as an example. At the end of Romans 11, verse 1, what does Paul say? He says, I myself am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham and a member of the tribe of Benjamin. Then again, as Paul goes and he gives this example of Elijah, the words of Elijah where he says, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one who actually believes in God anymore. As he's surrounded by wickedness on every direction, as the people of Israel are buying into whatever the next kingdom over is claiming. We know the story of Israel, buying into everything around them, forsaking God, the adulterous sister. And Elijah says, I'm the only one left. But what does God say? As Elijah cries this, look at verse 4. Do you remember God's reply? God said, no, I have 7,000 others who have never bowed down to Baal. A remnant remains in the nation of Israel through God's grace as believers. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful truth that even though they have most, as an entirety, rejected Christ as a whole, there's a few left. Paul gives himself as an example, right? We know Paul fully trusts Christ. After he has that miracle, that interaction, that experience with God on the road to Damascus, Paul's proof that a remnant remains. A few have remained. A few have found favor in God, the elect. Paul's a few of his generation elected to faith. Remember, we talked about God is sovereign in his election and choosing who he will show mercy to and who he won't. But then man still has responsibility, right? I don't want to separate those two things. They work hand in hand. But through God's grace, through God's mercy, Paul is selected as one of the few in his generation as elect to receive the favor of God. But brothers and sisters, this is a beautiful thing because not only is there a remnant that remains in Paul's time, but it remains through many generations. Again, if we look back, Elijah, the prophet Elijah, is Old Testament. Hundreds, if not thousands of years before Christ and Paul would ever come around. Yet what does God say? I have 7,000 others who have not bowed down to Baal. Through generations, even to today, brothers and sisters, there is a remnant of Israel that remains under God's favor. If you've never heard of an organization called Friends of Israel, I encourage you, look them up. The owners, the managers, if you will, of this organization are Messianic Jews. Jews who have given their life to Christ, who truly say Christ is Messiah, who are this remnant. And they go and preach the gospel to Jews who have not given their life to Christ. It's a beautiful organization giving us a reminder as Gentiles that a remnant remains. And we'll see that importance as we continue going through Romans and as we look in books like Revelation and Daniel and all these prophecies of end times where Israel continues to pop up. That remnant becomes so important. So celebrate. As we celebrate the grave being empty, we should celebrate a remnant of Israel remains. That God's chosen people, there are still those who believe, who see that empty tomb and celebrate with us. Even though as a whole, the nation of Israel has rejected Christ. But again, this should be good news to us. This should be beautiful news to us. And we see that in the next few verses. In verses 11 through 24, we see why Israel's rejection should make us celebrate. And I hate to say that because it sounds so harsh. But we see in these verses why, as Gentiles, we should have joy. Why we can receive joy through Israel's rejection. Because look with me at these verses. As Israel's disobedient, in verse 11, God made salvation available to the Gentiles. Brothers and sisters, because of Israel's disobedience, because Israel rejected Christ, disobeyed, refused to see Christ as who he was, we can now receive salvation. Before this time, salvation was not available to us. But now it is. The Gentile gift is now available because of Israel's disobedience. Stop and think about that for a moment. We've been given a gift. We've been given an opportunity to celebrate that we never once had before this moment. Before Israel rejected Christ, it was not available to us. Today, we often forget that. As Gentiles who get to worship and get to celebrate, we often forget that there was a time where it was not for us. Stop and think about that for a minute. Hopefully that brings gratitude. That this gift is made available. And of course, it's not something to celebrate in. We'll see that in a little bit. We shouldn't celebrate in Israel's disobedience, but it should bring us to gratitude. We should rejoice because we've been given the gift. In verse 15, Paul says, since their rejection meant that God offered salvation to the rest of the world. Through their rejection, Gentiles can be brought to salvation. It should bring us to gratitude. It should bring us to the foot of the cross saying thank you. Even more so than just celebrating that Christ is alive, we should say thank you for giving me the opportunity. It's not something we've always had. Now, for you and I sitting here, it is, right? None of us were alive back in the time where Israel was the sole child, singular child of God. For us sitting here, it's just been normal. We've always had this opportunity. We've always had this gift. Don't let us cloud our minds so much to forget that this is a gift that we've not always had. Paul gives an illustration in verse 17 and following of an olive tree. He says, but some of these branches from Abraham's tree, some of the people of Israel have been broken off. And you Gentiles who were branches from a wild olive tree have been grafted in. So now you also receive the blessing God has promised Abraham and his children, sharing in the rich nourishment from the root of God's special olive tree. Let me explain this for a minute. Those branches that were cut off is Israel. These branches of the tree that were broken off is Israel because of their disobedience. Now those branches that are grafted in, us, given the opportunity to share in the nourishment of the root of that special olive tree. So you may ask, what's the olive tree? It's being part of God's family. Because of Israel's rejection, because of Israel's disobedience, God cut them out, and we are now able to take part in that. We can be grafted into the family of God. We should celebrate for that. But look what Paul says right after this. He says, verse 18, you must not brag about being grafted in to replace the branches that were broken off. So again, this is not something we should brag in. This is not something we should necessarily shout and celebrate about that, oh yeah, Israel's cut off, so now I get to come in. That's not the point. That's not the point. The point of this is that we should be moved to gratitude because we get to be grafted in. We get the opportunity to receive salvation. We should be thankful. Our heart should be in a posture of bowing down because we have this special opportunity to be grafted into the family of God. The Israelites at this time were famous for their favoritism and their hidey-tidy attitude. Were they not? You look through the entire New Testament, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious leaders were so stuck up and arrogant with themselves. This warning Paul gives us is that we don't become like that. We've been given the gift of salvation, but it's not something we should brag in. This is not something where we should say, look, I'm better than the Israelites now. That's not what Paul's begging us. Don't think like that. Think in a posture of gratitude. Think in a posture of bowing down. Because we don't deserve it. It's a gift. Not something to be bragging about. In verse 20, Paul continues and he says, so don't think highly of yourself, but fear what could happen. The branches of Israel were not cut off for us. Paul warns about that attitude. He says, they were not broken off for you. But it was because of their disobedience that we have the opportunity. So don't think highly of yourself, but fear what could happen. And as we look at verses 21 and 22 and 23 and 24, we begin to see what to fear. Verse 21, for if God did not spare the original branches, He won't spare you either. Powerful statement. For if God cut off Israel because of their rejection, because of their unbelief, we can be cut off because of our unbelief. As a whole, the Gentiles can be rejected as Israel was cut off. Fear that. Again, more motivation for us to go and preach the gospel. 22, notice how God is both kind and severe. He is severe toward those who disobeyed, but kind to you if you continue to trust in His kindness. But if you stop trusting, you also will be cut off. Think about that for a moment. Think about that warning from Paul for just a minute. If Israel can be cut off because of their rejection, so can we. Again, as a whole, the Gentiles can be cut off from the gift of salvation. We can have our hearts hardened, just as Israel did. God is kind to those who trust in His kindness, severe to those who disobey it. And look at verse 23 with me. And if the people of Israel turn from their unbelief, they will be grafted in again, for God has the power to graft them back into the tree. God has the power to do whatever He wants. Cut off whoever He wants, reject whoever He wants, graft in whoever He wants. Don't get high about yourself because you're saved. Don't think highly of yourself because you've given yourself to Christ. Don't think highly of yourself because this gift is available. It's through God. His mercy, His kindness, His sovereignty that we've been studying. Because as we look at the last 11, 12 verses 25 through 26, we see Israel's coming restoration. And that did not do what it was supposed to do. Israel's coming restoration. In these last verses, Paul instructs and Paul explains how there's a time coming where Israel as a whole will be grafted back into that tree. Look with me. I want you to understand this mystery, dear brothers and sisters, so that you will not feel proud about yourselves. Again, there's that warning again. Some of the people of Israel have hard hearts, but this will last only until the full number of Gentiles comes to Christ. 26. And so all Israel will be saved. Paul makes this mystery clear. And in the New Testament, when Paul is explaining a mystery, because Paul does it very often, the word mystery is not explaining something that's ununderstandable. It's just something that hasn't been introduced. So this is the first time Paul's making this argument clear. That's why he calls it this mystery. That's why he calls it this weird thing that people have never heard, because it just hasn't been brought up. So Paul comes to him and says, guys, I want to explain this to you so you don't get high on yourself. Because the Israelites having hard hearts, what does he say? Will only last until the full number of Gentiles come to Christ. Paul makes this clear so we don't get proud. Why? Because all Israel will be restored. As a whole, the nation of Israel will be restored. It didn't go forward. There we go. As a whole. Again, as a whole, they rejected Christ, but as a whole, they will be restored. There's a time coming called the millennial kingdom, when Christ and believers will reign on earth for 1,000 years. There's a time within this millennial kingdom where the nation of Israel will receive the promises that God gave them. And there's a judgment coming for both Jew and Gentile alike who have rejected Christ. So now Paul's not saying every single Jew will come to Christ, but he's saying as a whole, the nation of Israel will be brought back to the tree of children, of being God's family. Paul says this in verse 28. Many of the people of Israel are now enemies of the good news, and this benefits us as Gentiles. Yet they are still the people he loves because he chose their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For God's gifts and his call can never be withdrawn. The people of Israel are right now enemies of God. But don't forget something. Look with me in verse 30. Once you Gentiles were rebels against God, but when the people of Israel rebelled against him, God was merciful to you instead. Let us not forget that even though Israel might be the ones rejected, Israel might be the ones out of the family of God, it was once us. Ephesians 2, verses 11 through 16 explain this and remind us that we were once dead in our sin. We were once the enemies of God. But that changed at Israel's disobedience, at Israel's rejection. We were once his enemy. Don't forget that. Don't forget that we were the ones once under the wrath of God. God can give grace and mercy to whoever he wants. He's the one that's sovereign. He's the one that can choose. He's the one that has all the knowledge. Look with me as Paul closes this chapter. Verses 33 through 36. Oh, how great are God's riches and wisdom and knowledge. How impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways. For who can know the Lord's thoughts? Who knows enough to give him advice? And who has given him so much that he needs to pay it back? For everything comes from him and exists by his power and is intended for his glory. All glory to him forever. Amen. As Paul closes this out, he quotes from places like Job, where God claps back, argues back with Job and says, who are you to tell me who I am? Were you there when I created? He quotes places like Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8, where God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts. His ways are greater than our ways. Who are we to try and tell God who we are? Who are we to stand here and say, you know what, Israel's forgotten about and now it's our time? Who are we to get high on ourselves, to think highly of ourselves? Brothers and sisters, we should come crawling to the cross saying, thank you. It is a gift that we get to celebrate. It is a gift that we can easily lose. Who are we to tell God what he should and shouldn't do? His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts, much more than our thoughts. Everything comes from him and exists by his power. The breath we have in our lungs is a gift from him. The reason we get to celebrate today, that the tomb is empty, is a gift from him. Everything comes from him and exists by his power. So this gift, above all others, don't reject it. Don't be one of those who puts it off till the very end. You're not given tomorrow. You're not given a safe drive home. It's a gift. It's a gift that we can gather together as Gentiles in worship. Because God decided to allow us to be grafted into the tree of his family. It is a gift above all others. Jesus Christ himself is a gift. I read it this morning out of Philippians chapter 2, out at sunrise service. The passage where Christ doesn't count equality with God to be something to cling to, but instead he gave himself up as a humble servant to obedience to God, to die a criminal's death on a cross. That's a gift. Now is our chance to say thank you, God. To receive that gift. A gift's not a gift if we don't receive it. So please, if you're sitting here today, don't reject this gift that God has given us. He sent his son to die a criminal's death on a cross to wash you white as snow. We can't do it. The gap that we've created through sin is too far for us to jump But Jesus Christ came and bridged that gap so that we could have life with the God who loves us enough to graft us into his family. That's a gift. Don't take it for granted. Do not take it for granted. I beg you, I urge you, come to the cross with gratitude and say, yes, Lord. Come to the cross with gratitude and say, thank you, Jesus. Don't reject it. Brothers and sisters, we celebrate the empty tomb this morning. That the stone was rolled away, that Friday was not the end of the story, that Christ is risen and continues to live among us. We get to celebrate that today. That's that gift. Because of the sacrifice of Christ, sin is defeated. And because of the resurrection that we celebrate today, death is defeated. Two of the scariest things of this earth, sin and death, are both defeated through Christ's death and resurrection. Celebrate that with an attitude of gratitude. Look at that, I rhymed. I'm proud of myself this morning. An attitude of gratitude where we come to the cross and say, Lord, thank you. It's all we have. I love the song by Brandon Lake, Gratitude. He sings about this gratitude. He says, I've got nothing else, so I throw up my hands and I praise you again and again. Because this is a gift. Today, we can receive this gift, but it's not given that it'll be there tomorrow, whether it be because we die or be because, as a whole, Gentiles rejected Christ. Israel will be restored. The truth of this should affect our lives in so many ways, in every way. We'll see some of these here in a little bit. But brothers and sisters, we should find humility in the truth that God's grace is available through his mercy after Israel's rejection. Let me say that again. We should find humility in the truth that God's grace is available through his mercy because of Israel's rejection. But we should also find power in the truth of the resurrection. Because brothers and sisters, the same power that rose Jesus from the dead lives within us today. That same power that breathed life into a dead man dwells within us. That's power. It's power to go and preach the gospel. It's power to go and live different. But it is not power to go and think of ourselves highly than we should. We get to celebrate. We get to celebrate this gift above all others. For those of you who are not here for Good Friday service, we're going to close today with a video by a guy named Francis Chan. We watched the first part of this Bible study series on Friday night. And he talked through how beautiful the cross really was. And how amazing Good Friday truly was. Now I want to share with you a quote from Francis Chan at the end of this Good Friday video before we watch the Easter Sunday one. He said this: "The good news of the cross is so much bigger than every other thing in your life." If we don't understand that, we truly don't get anything. If we don't understand the good news of the cross is bigger than every other piece of our life, everything else, we truly don't get it. Because that gift is the gift above all others. That Jesus would die and then allow us to be grafted into his family. So today as we close, we're going to watch this video. It's about 9 minutes long. This will be our closing song. It's not a song.